recording screen, and I'm going to go over to the Join Me session on your end and maximizing in 3, 2, okay. So hopefully I'll be able to queue up the audio with the visual pretty well there. And other than that, everybody, and I'm probably going to end up doing this as more of like a documentary as opposed to a series, but just in case, hey everybody, this is one of the final sections of this video series. We're going to start talking about the eclipses, eclipse data that's provided from NASA and that's observed from the ground here in reality, and what Brian has apparently uncovered, and we'll sort of talk about how he's come to these conclusions and talk about the data. But apparently Brian has uncovered that the very data that NASA uses, or the very observations of eclipses, especially in the southern regions during the winter solstice, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, we're seeing things that shouldn't happen on a globe Earth model, with the sun, being 93 million miles away, and the moon being, transiting the sun in a globe Earth model. Essentially, these observations that we're seeing are not in line with the globe Earth model. So with that, Brian, if you could maybe just tell us a little bit about where you were at in your I tend to say our flat Earth journey, but either you're a glober, or you're on the fence, or you're on the other side, you're a flat earther. There's sort of no in between once you get to this, once you get to that point. But there's a lot of people riding the fence, and so I just maybe like to hear sort of where you were at in your journey and what led you to start looking at the eclipse data.
Well, I kind of share the same story as Mark, as far as going through all these other issues and reviewing them and getting a better idea of what most likely occurred versus what the official narrative was. And I had just moved to Ann Arbor to have neck surgery, and that got delayed for a while. And just due to the situation I was in, they needed something to grab my attention. And I just looked into the research of AIDS and some other storylines that are out there, and got exhausted from that. And flat Earth was an issue, and I looked into that, and there's a Kellogg IA site. Familiar with? It looks like Kellogia.
Okay,
anyway,
I'm not familiar. And one thing, I don't know, you had mentioned your research sort of leading you into looking at AIDS, and I don't know if you ever ran into Dr. Len Horowitz and his whole basically expose of how the HIV virus was definitely provably engineered in a lab. And so when you run into stuff like that, it's almost like, well, what else could possibly be out there that they're lying about? So, yeah.
Yeah, it's real easy when you fall into that trap of what else, and it's, okay, that's not right, and again, to be the guy in the street corner saying, hey guys, I think this is what's happening, and it's like, there he goes again, he's got, everything's a conspiracy. And so anyway,
this one's a little bit different than any of the others, and for a couple of reasons. This isn't like JFK, or this isn't like 9/11, where they can sort of hide the evidence and change stories around and, really put out a lot of disinformation and ship all the evidence away to China and that sort of thing. This is the place where we all live, and so it's almost like they have to use propaganda, and really the only defense against this truth is ignorance, because once a person actually, scrutinizes the heliocentric model, there are a lot of problems, and those problems just simply vanish. They don't exist in the stationary flat Earth model. So, to me, it's just, it's one of those things to where they can try to make us seem stupid, and they can try to make this seem like a weird conspiracy theory, but at the end of the day, it is completely different than any of the other ones, because we live on the damn thing. We don't live on JFK's, that day, or 9/11. We don't perpetually dwell in that scenario, and so this is a little different.
Well, again, it's just straightforward fact, and I keep using the comparable scenario as someone discovers that only guys can have or only women can have babies and guys can't. And somehow that through centuries that we were misled thinking that guys and women can have babies, but just women do for whatever reason. And now there's a revelation that it's proof positive that guys can't have babies.
Well, and you know, it's funny, I stumbled into, and I should probably research this more before commenting on it, but I remember stumbling into something where there's these dudes who
that
are
have
getting
babies.
yeah, they're getting these surgeries to have basically have a uterus implanted inside them, and if I'm not mistaken, they've actually had one that did it. Now I might be mistaken, but I'm pretty sure that there was a dude that gave birth to a baby. Now I'm not going to don't quote me on that, but and I'll double check.
I wouldn't do that.
And then, of course, you know, the whole propaganda thing of this is look at the old Arnold Schwarzenegger film where he actually plays a man who has a baby. And so it's almost as if, you know, you've got the Hollywood propaganda arm of the government, which essentially it is. They're owned by military industrial complex proxy corporations. But you've got this whole media conglomerate pushing forward these ideas, or essentially manufacturing the consent or manufacturing the path that we need to get towards this point where, yeah, dudes are giving birth to babies because of this surgery that you know, apparently they have. So, yeah, totally crazy.
Yeah, that was a good plug for Noam Chomsky as far as the manufacturing consent. I fell into his path for a few months just listening to his observations and everything. Again, it's just pieces to a puzzle. No one's, or at least from my standpoint, going to run and say that's absolute. I think it's ludicrous for anyone to say they think they know anything at this point. You know, you can say that you've seen a side and see things that make more sense, but certainly I don't think we can trust anything in its totality, except for the shape of the earth.
Yeah, really.
But again, so back in March 2014, I was laid up and the flat thing came up, and I watched a couple hours of videos, and I swear I walked to the store to get some milk. I looked up and go, yep, it's flat. It was the easiest one for me to just go. It verified everything, because I'm not saying that I was smart enough to realize that not spinning through space and all these other, you know, ridiculous scenarios that accumulate to what we're taught. It's just I could never understand it, going from the flights from the West Coast to the East Coast and back, and maybe the jet stream slows down the east to west a little bit, but by no means measurable where they're fighting into a 800,000 mile headwind. So again, that whole item of catching up with the Earth or flying into the Earth as it rotates never made sense. You know, where does the air separate from space, and the whole vacuum in space never made sense. Again, just from physics, when you propel against something, you have to have something to propel against to push.
That's right. It's like trying to grab yourself by the collar and lift yourself up off the ground. It doesn't work because you don't have any fulcrum, you don't have any leverage, and so one major issue with rocketry in space is if
it doesn't work.
Yeah, if it is a vacuum, not only is there nothing for the rocket to propel against, which is normally the air, but also even if you could somehow get the thing, to propel itself, you wouldn't be able to steer it, because a rocket relies on the aerodynamic laws that essentially creates this sort of back pressure towards the front nose, which is why it's aerodynamically sort of pointed or tapered to a point, and that allows for the airflow coming around all sides of the rocket to keep it stable. Now, without that back pressure in the air, and without the air to push the rocket up against, it just simply fucking doesn't work, period. So, Yeah.
Deep.
Yeah, and, at the end of the day, I always had issues, my whole life with the constellations, somehow being fixed in their alignments and never ever changing because, we're told that we're within this galaxy, this arm of a spiral galaxy that's always spinning, but all of these other galaxies are supposedly flying away from each other at, just mind-boggling speeds, and yet for thousands of years, the constellations all remain exactly the same. So that never sat well with me, but, it was, and I had other experiences as well that didn't sit well with me, but we tend to not put two and two together because we're told, oh, you're stupid for thinking that, you're stupid for thinking this, when in reality the stupid thing is the globe Earth model. It really is.
Well, I repressed all those thoughts of does it make sense, and again, in the environment growing up in, that you didn't dare object to what you're being told, so kind of tucking it away of a huge question mark. And not until I felt like I could speak up for myself and get an ounce of a backbone that, just kind of started questioning more verbally things. But I get a visceral reaction to things that are absolutely nonsensical. And I think example is, what was the movie with Keanu Reeves he had to maintain the 50 miles an hour? In the bus?
Speed. Yeah.
Speed.
Yep.
Okay, so there's a scene in Speed where they're flying through the bus, or flying down the highway in the bus, and it hits the section of the bridge that's out, and on a downward trajectory, as it goes over, it flies off in an upward motion. So stuff like that just absolutely is so insulting to the brain. I don't know. So anyway, in things like this where, this is the diagram standard exhibit that's used for solar eclipse, and it kind of looks neat with these lines and everything, but these lines mean absolutely nothing. They're tangent points from this circle, but this means absolutely nothing. Because again, just from a perspective standpoint, that you've got this that should be probably 20 feet to the left, and this about 20 times smaller, and that would be somewhat proportional. And this angle is virtually nothing as they show it here. So just its depiction looks great, but it has absolutely no definition of clarity of what it really means. These are tangent points that mean nothing. Light.
Right.
I kind of did this before.
For people that don't understand the issue, and this is just sort of to make sure that I'm explaining this correctly, but the issue with this whole eclipse thing is the shadow from, and we're talking about solar eclipses, the shadow from the moon apparently comes in from the wrong direction. And the way that they explain this is they say, well, the light from the sun is coming from so far away, it's actually inverting, and you can see that's that sort of X mark to the left of the moon in this example, where the sunlight from the tip of the top of the sun to the bottom of the sun inverts and switches places somehow to where the moon, that's why the moon, or the shadow of the moon, appears to, transit the sun in the wrong direction. Or maybe have I got it wrong that that's in terms of lunar eclipses?
No, well, I just want to tackle one at a time because it's really hard to throw them both out there and easy to get them confused, or at least for me.
It is.
So let's plow through this so everyone kind of gets off on what the solar eclipse setup is. And just from starters, that light radiates outward. It doesn't skim off the surface and plunge down at this angle and skim up at this angle and everything else. So again, light source radiates outward. So if anything, lines of shadow would follow something like this. Again, that's not contestable. That's the way light is. You get a light bulb and see what it does. Anyway.
I see what you're saying. The shadow from the moon.
This means nothing. This means absolutely nothing.
The shadow from the moon should be much larger than the moon it should get wider and wider because I see exactly what you're saying. And I've had people argue with me that the shadow from the moon in this example, well, let me put it this way. Sorry, I don't mean to throw you off track.
No, you're not.
But okay, let me put it to you this way. Every month, the moon goes around the Earth once a month. Okay, and so to me, I would expect to see lunar eclipses very frequently because all the moon has to do is go behind the shadow of the Earth, or go, put itself to where the Earth is in between the moon and the sun. And to me, that would seem to be very, very frequent and very likely to happen because of just the nature of the system. But in fact, when you study it, lunar eclipses and solar eclipses, they happen about 230 times per year on predictable cycles each. And so they're just as likely. They're just as common, solar and lunar eclipses. And to me, this was a huge huge problem for the globe Earth model. But I've had people argue that the shadow from the Earth would go in the opposite way that you would think, in the opposite way that light behaves, and that's the only way it works. They say that basically the shadow of the Earth turns into a point, when instead I believe it should go out like in a array, like spreading out, not
right.
going back down towards a point. So anyways, the whole thing to me is just so ridiculous, but not to throw you off, and hopefully, for any of our newer to the flat Earth viewers out there, this will help to sort of explain, from a total layman's standpoint, which is me, the issue and why we have this diagram where there's an X from the sunlight, which is the standard. That's the standard model.
Right. So the task I kind of put to hand was forget about everything except for what the scenario is supposed to be for solar eclipse. So this is what they're saying occurs. And taking it at face value is that you've got the sun, moon, earth. Just keep it simple. As the moon is in between the earth and the sun. Forget about all these other lines. So this casting of a shadow, according to this figure, creates a point. And if you go to the NASA data,
and I just think it's so funny because regardless of how big and far the sun is, apparently from here on the Earth, it's just about the same size as the moon. So technically, you could say that they're the same size, because they are, apparently. And so for them to have all these diagrams of the sun being this massive object and the moon, perfectly transiting that little cross-section of where the light inverts itself, it's just so ridiculous to me.
Well, we're going to try and stay away from using adjectives and adverbs, or at least I am.
Sure.
And
well, no,
I've already gotten off to a bad start as far as saying some. So I'm going to try.
We're not on the witness stand or anything, but yeah, I definitely want you to sort of keep this as objective and professional as possible. And just for any of you guys out there, listen to Brian in terms of the technical stuff. I can say whatever I want because I'm a silly, crazy flat earther.
See, that's the thing. I don't mean to correct you, but I mean to correct you that
no,
this isn't a technical issue.
No, I know exactly what you mean.
Okay.
So no, you're totally fine. I'm a joker.
And smoker. Okay. So, and I have an extraordinarily sensitive keypad. So with that image, trying to, where'd that little model go? That guy. Okay. So according to the official narrative is, and we'll just call it in layman's terms so we can, oh gosh. stop. Wow. All right. Okay. So with the moon shadow being projected onto Earth, that these are what we're being told are the calm scratches on the surface based on the shadow, if we're following.
So,
So call this a stylus on a needle on a album, and this is the needle hitting the record. And so these are where the stylus hits the record and leaves a little scratch. So that is the path of the peak moment of this ecliptic event.
Right.
And you follow that?
Yeah, and I think the first time that you had showed this to me, I had a little trouble understanding, and so just my way to put it. I think you did an excellent job of explaining it there alone. But and again, I already understand what you're talking about, so I'm just going to try to maybe reiterate that if you were to play the eclipse in fast forward and watch the shadow from the eclipse hit the face of the Earth during the event, it would ascribe those marks that you see. And that's according to observational data, and it's according to, I guess the whole point of this is they have to be using a flat Earth model, but we'll get into that. But this is the observable data. This is what we experience on the ground in reality during eclipses, and those little scratches or markings or basically wavy lines are the very numbers and the very data that NASA will provide you if you get it from NASA.
Right. I'm just going from a very broad stroke present or just concept of what's going on. Mm-hmm. So these are the images that are provided showing the sun and the moon during these ecliptic events for solar eclipse. And this is where, I'm pointing at the screen, this is where that scratch starts. So those other ones you saw were kind of maybe S-shaped and they kind of followed a sine, cosine type curve. Yep. And as you see, as we progress, these are on hourly gaps. So as we go forward, you see that little, say the stylus hitting the record, that little scratch going across. So you kind of follow that?
Yeah, and basically, so we're just, you could probably draw a curved line that just described the path that shadow took. Yep. And now, solar eclipses, they range in time pretty greatly. I think from anywhere from a couple of minutes up to maybe 10 or 12 minutes for the duration of the event?
Oh, I thought they were like 3 hours or so.
Maybe I'm wrong. I'm thinking of the peak event, right?
Yes, the peak event is minutes,
right?
But the event in its entirety is 3 and change. Usually
hours.
From what I was seeing.
Right. Yeah, and I guess what I'm talking about is totality. To me, that was very striking, that the totality of the eclipse, so the point where, whether it's an annular eclipse, and I think we should probably define the two, but whether it's an annular eclipse or a solar full total eclipse, the totality of the event where the moon allegedly is completely blotting out the sun, that ranges wildly from, I think, if I'm not mistaken, it's something like 2 to 3 minutes, or maybe less, up to 10 or 14 minutes or something like that. So it's pretty crazy. And I think that's depending on where you observe the event from. It's depending on which event it is. And that, it's very strange to me in the heliocentric model. Anyways,
yes.
Sorry.
Okay.
Sorry. I'm thinking out loud here.
Exactly what I was thinking, but you said it better. Anyway, so again, these are the peak moments, the bright orange lines. Again, I'll kind of go through this several times so you kind of get what's going on. Again, this is going backwards and going forwards. Sun goes east to west, and then this is where the eclipse comes. The bright orange is where the scratch is on the other map. So you saw where that dark orange is. If I were to have increments of, say, 5 minutes, then you would see constant line moving throughout. But these are still shots of the event taken on hour gaps.
Okay, and you're using, for these images, you're using datetime.com, right?
Yes, who references NASA.
Okay. All right.
NASA. So the last one, by example, not exactly the same location. You'd see the dark orange circle here, then here, then here, here, and then it would be gone. So that's the peak moments along the path of the eclipse.
Yep, understood.
So again, understood? Okay. And so we're just trying to lay out what
and by the way,
of
what I would have just mentioned real quick is, by the way, that image that we were looking at was showing a bunch of eclipses. So anyone that's confused, that wasn't one eclipse. That was many, even solar and lunar eclipses.
Right.
No, you're fine. I just wanted to point that out in case anyone was like, well, wow, the eclipse made all those marks. No, that was multiple events over probably, like a decade.
Yeah, that was a 20-year gap,
Okay.
and I apologize. Let me turn that part of the brain on as far as the background.
Yeah.
Because, again, I'm terrible at
No, it's fine.
Walking and chewing gum.
No, it's all good, homie.
Okay. So I just wanted to go through a couple more events.
Yeah, absolutely.
Again, this is just laying out the concept of what's going on. These are still shots of the event as it crosses from east to west. That this is our 0. Hour 1, 2, and then all this was plotted on both the heliocentric and the geocentric models. But again, we're just getting the conceptual idea of what's going on. So as the sun and the moon pass, remember the model is sun, moon, earth. So this shows that correct order of sun, moon behind, then earth. So what they're saying is the moon, the orange circle, dot, scratch, that item is the shadow of the moon. And before you get into the umbras and ambras and all that, we're just going to keep it at the total eclipse event. And we'll kind of show what these other ones are. But from the data that's available, I had 43 solar eclipses between 1980 and 2020 that were total eclipse events. And between 1985 and 2020, 26 lunar eclipse events.
Okay.
So again, I just didn't want to be impartial. Is just take a big cluster and you throw down what you have.
Yep. Spot check in a sample. And one thing I think I'll mention really quickly is a lot of people think that the fact that we can predict eclipses up to say 10 years in the future, or even 100 years in the future, they think that that's exclusive to the heliocentric model. And I would just sort of mention really quick.
Oh, it's the opposite.
Let everyone know that they were predicting eclipses and actually calculating the orbital speeds and the time for orbit of Jupiter well before any globe model was ever sort of introduced. And so our ability to predict eclipses has been around since before people thought for some reason that we lived on a spinning globe. So
spoiler alert that Jupiter and all those are lights. Just get over it, people.
The stars for sure.
Spoiler alert.
The stars for sure. And now I'm not so sure about these other luminaries, the wandering stars, because they possess characteristics very similar to the moon. For example, they go through phases just like the moon does. They appear, if there is anything physical up up there, I believe that the moon and the wandering stars would be closer to physical than the actual stars, because it appears that we can't even see the stars unless you're standing on the ground. So if you go up to, 130,000 feet, you're not going to see any stars for some reason, and I think it's because the light doesn't diffract into the visible spectrum until you get down to a certain level of the ground, or beneath a certain level of the atmosphere. But that's just conjecture, but that's just me. Something up with the stars. I don't know about the wandering stars, but yeah, space as we know it is certainly not what we've been told, that's for sure.
No.
Yep.
So, again, from the solar eclipse, I broke it out into, I was noticing patterns, so I called them different types, and the rest I just took as a complete data set, the total eclipses throughout, to see what was going on for the patterned events.
Yeah, and I had an idea a while back, and I actually made a video about it, just looking into eclipses, because I was curious just to see how that data, and I was totally looking at it in a different direction than you were, so I'm glad that you looked at it, because I totally missed what you found, and this is what we'll go over. But I was just sort of interested in looking at the relationship between seasons and how the season affects whether the eclipse is annular or total. And just to give a brief explanation of the two, an annular eclipse is where, if you could show that picture that you had with the white circle over the sun, you just had it up a second ago. Sorry to throw you off track. Yeah, right there. So if you look at that white circle over the sun, that would essentially represent an annular eclipse, whereas a total eclipse would be that white circle totally covers up the sun completely. So you can't see any sun behind whatever is transiting it. And so that's sort of the definition, or the difference between an annular eclipse and a total eclipse, for anybody that wasn't sure. And that was the reason why I was interested in what seasons correspond to which, and how that cycle goes through. And I was very surprised to see that, say, summer will produce an annular eclipse, and then a total eclipse, and then annular eclipse. It'll go through that cycle within a decade sometimes. And so I was very surprised, and that has to do with the supposed orbit of the Earth. But so I guess we're getting way ahead of the conversation here, so I'll let you continue on.
No, I'm going to fill in the blanks, because here you started to talk about the annular, and so everyone's on the same page as far as what's being described, because again, words and visuals sometimes are difficult to match up.
Yep.
So from the timeanddates.com, that their description of the annular event is given, and if you want to read it, you can.
Sure. In an annular eclipse of the sun, the moon casts its antumbra, the outer part of the moon's umbra, on the Earth. Like total solar eclipses, annular solar eclipses can also be seen as partial eclipses from locations outside the moon's antumbra, but inside its penumbra. So there you go.
Right. And Uma Thurman, she was in that one movie that...
Right, yeah, I love Uma Thurman. Yeah, favorite.
Gosh.
And to put that in, that long description, basically an annular eclipse makes the sun appear like a ring, a bright ring in the sky, whereas a total eclipse completely blots out the sun. And that's the difference. And I, the reason this is important, I believe, is because of the relative distances involved with where's the moon in its supposed alleged orbit, and where is the Earth in its supposed alleged orbit. And according to the U.S. Navy, the Earth is actually slightly closer to the sun during the winter in the north. And so the Earth is slightly further away from the sun during the summer in the north, which is sort of counterintuitive for people who live in the north. But anyways, at the end of the day, you would think, now granted, the the date of perihelion, which is, again, we'll say that's the winter solstice, so that's when the Earth is closest to the sun, the date of perihelion slowly regresses over long periods of time, so we're talking ages. But in fact, we see this change between summer annular and summer total eclipses very rapidly, and so to me, I was very surprised from a globe Earth perspective to see that, and I'm just glad that you actually delved a little bit deeper into what's going on here. And so, with that being said, I'll let you continue.
Okay. Again, with the solar event, that this is the mark, the shadow path that we're going to look for and line up the solar and lunar data as far as the orientation in the sky, and use distances from a proportional standpoint, not the exact number being used for a specific distance, but just the increase, decrease.
Okay, and so just so that I make sure that I understand it, and so that everyone that's following along understands it, instead of saying the sun is 92 million miles away, we'll say that the sun is at, and this is just an arbitrary number as an example, but we'll say that 92 million miles away is the mean distance, and we'll call that 100%. Now, say it's January, well, we might be a little bit closer to the sun, and so it would be, I guess, 102% or whatever. Of the mean
right.
average value, whereas during the summer it's going to be slightly further away, so the distance is going to be greater. So at any rate, instead of using 92 million miles, we'll just say it's 1% higher than the average, right?
Exactly. Okay. And again, just keep repeating to see what the setup is for that type of eclipse. And just to reference the other is where the lunar eclipse is the shadow of the Earth onto the moon. So it's a reverse. And you don't have the scratches in the Earth's surface versus a shadow which covers approximately half of the surface area of Earth.
Right, according to the heliocentric model, and that's for a lunar eclipse.
Right.
Yep.
Right. So again, you've got the shadow in here and daylight here, and it's within that period that the eclipse is visible. So again, that's all I want to do with just briefly touch what the lunar eclipse is.
Okay. And correct me if I'm wrong, and you know what, I think I'm in for sort of a treat, because I know that you and I had a chance to go over the major sort of bombshell in terms of the solar eclipses, but I don't even think that you and I had a chance to discuss the lunar, so that'll be interesting to me. But of course, we'll cover the solar first, because I think that's the real bombshell sort of smoking gun.
Well, actually, they're both. Yeah. Again, it's orientation, but...
Well, and then what do I know? Because again, I haven't even seen what you found in terms of the lunar eclipses, so that'll be a surprise for me. Anyways.
Well, the concept's pretty straightforward. Is for the solar eclipse, you've got sun, Earth, or sun, moon, Earth, and seeing the shadow. And for the lunar, you've got sun,
Earth, moon, right?
Moon.
Yeah.
and again, all I'm trying to do is line up the angle of the sun and the moon and see if they lay a concentric line.
Right. Now, one thing I think to mention here too, because I think there's probably some confusion in this for people that aren't familiar with the heliocentric model, which is most people actually that believe in the heliocentric model. But apparently, let's just say that the Earth orbits the sun on a plane. It's tilted on that plane at from from the horizontal axis is tilted at 66.6 degrees, but from the vertical axis is tilted at, say, 23.4 degrees, but it's always traveling along that same plane, along with most of the other planets. Now, the moon is sort of orbiting the Earth in the heliocentric model along that same plane, so we'll call it the solar plane, but it is off at a sort of a tilt. So the moon isn't allegedly orbiting the Earth at exactly the same plane, the solar plane, but slightly tilted. And I forget what the degrees is. Maybe it's 23.4 as well. Don't quote me on that. But at any rate, there isn't this perfect alignment in terms of the planes upon which these objects orbit. There are some slight variances. So, anyways, just wanted to point that out because a lot of people don't understand which direction things are supposedly even going in the heliocentric model, which is all clockwise. The sun goes clockwise around the galactic center, the Earth goes clockwise around the sun, and the moon goes clockwise around the Earth. That's according to heliocentric model. But it's not all on a perfect plane, if that's the point. And I'll put up a graphic overlaid on this to show what I'm saying. So hopefully that'll help.
Right. And again, what everyone's head should explode. If it doesn't, then you're not trying to conceptualize this hard enough, because jumping between the different models, you've got the globe. So from North Pole to South Pole is 180 degrees, but on the flat model, from the angle is rotated 90 degrees, and they kind of stretch 90 degrees into 180 and 180 into 360. So again, you're kind of jumping back and forth between these things. Then you've got the meridian, and I probably didn't make myself even clear if I was talking about the meridian or east-west lat-long type. So again, it's jumping back and forth.
Well, it does get sort of confusing because in the flat Earth model, the meridian lines are straight lines, but in the globe Earth model, those are running north to south, and they're all obviously going to be curved. But yeah, it is sort of hard to jump back and forth between the two, and that's not by accident. And real quick, I'm going to refill on coffee if you don't mind.
Yep, I'm right behind you.
Right.
Yep, good to go. All right, I'm back.
Alrighty, I'm back.
All right, mark where your time is, because I'm going to go back. Let me grab this one graphic, and then I'm going to describe the one with all the events on it. and then mark the time, because I'll try and use that for the setup for everything else, and just cut this out and put it in front of everything else.
So I'll just put a note to self here to try to use this next section as the setup or the intro. But it'll, I've gotten pretty good, not to toot my own horn, but I've gotten pretty good with editing to where, if I can just give myself a little cue like I just did, I don't even have to put any notes. I'll just put this before everything else that we talked about here. So no big deal.
Okay.
All right. Cool.
Okay.
It's so much fun too. It really is a lot of fun. I've always enjoyed, like creative and stuff like that, and it's just, it's a blast.
Oh, thanks. My brain is slow right now. So this is what I want. Okay. So for the solar eclipse events, what was done was this is a history of the event for 20 years from 1981 to 2000. So each of these were one event. See the red and the blue lines. The red is an annular eclipse. The blue is the total eclipse, and the hybrids are the pink, and we're not going to include those. We'll reference back later what the hybrid is, but again, keeping it simple with a total event that looked at the total eclipse event. So the profile, the signature of the shadow follows these paths. And what I had noticed was certain shapes were reoccurrent. Again, you've got kind of the S curve, and noticed again that these were reoccurring on 18-year cycles.
Right. Yep.
So go to 2001 to 2020. Again, we've got these little swirls, and when I broke it down to different types, we called maybe this S-shaped one type A, then we had type B, and had designated types A through G at a earlier event in the 80s and a later event in the 2010s. Again, the 18-year gap difference. And just to see what was going on there, because they didn't reoccur exactly at the same location, but say the signature here would be over here in that 18-year cycle.
So it's an identical signature, just slightly, essentially regressing or recessing as each cycle goes.
And I do have, we can plow through this.
Because it's almost as if everything is set up perfectly in balance and it never deviates. And to me, that's just so contrary to the heliocentric model, where it would seem to be way more chaotic because you've got so many different variables going on in terms of gravitational forces that don't exist. But anyway.
There's that word again. My ouch.
Yeah, I know. Sorry.
Oh, my brain.
It's almost like the night.
So, yeah, exactly. Okay, so again, we're seeing these signatures of reoccurring items, and I wanted to see what was going on, because for this event, it was occurring here. For this event, somewhat similar signature, it was occurring over here, and to get that to line up with the solar and lunar data.
And those are 18 years apart, right?
Right, and I don't know if the exact, again, it's kind of like the way NASA makes their cloud images. They just cut and paste, but that's another story. So, again, this is a unique it's projected for 2081 through 2100 that you get kind of a doubling up here. That pattern did not show up in the 40-year span that I looked at. But again, I just tried to make a uniform database that was one current or recent, past and present future, and one that was solely looking at total eclipse events, just to minimize all the variables, because one thing, at least for me, is in engineering to minimize as many variables as possible, because once you keep adding more variables, you've got more situations to address.
You want to know something that's going to drive you crazy, and I'm sure you've already thought about this, but the length of totality is a big issue here, too. And that's why I mentioned earlier, sometimes, and maybe I should look this up since we're talking about it, because I don't want to misquote, but the length of totality of these eclipses varies. And so to me, that's an important factor, a variable that probably needs to be taken into account, but it's such a minuscule thing that, and it really is irrelevant to the ultimate point that you've come up with here. But it's just another variable that'll drive you crazy, though, right?
Right.
And I'll look that up real quick. So I am not on screen share. So if you just hang tight 1 second, let me length of.
Are you doing your screen?
Well, I'm googling length of totality for solar eclipses.
Can I still present here?
You can talk and it'll be recorded. But right now I'm just googling something. Hold on.
But your screen's being recorded,
right, yeah,
not mine.
I believe that's the case. And here we go. Solar eclipse, Wikipedia. Moon's orbit is inclined. Oh, wait a minute. So this might be a good thing because, again, Wikipedia is sort of the source for the mainstream narrative. It says the moon's orbit is inclined, tilted at more than 5 degrees to the Earth's orbit around the sun. And so earlier I said it might have been 20 degrees. No, it's actually 5 degrees. So it's essentially, according to them, the moon is essentially orbiting on the same plane that the Earth orbits the sun. And so that's really important to keep in mind as well. And just for the reference, it says which can span most. Hang on a second. It's technically safe to view only the total phase of a solar eclipse with the unaided eye and without protection. However, this is a dangerous practice, as most people are not trained to recognize the phases of an eclipse, which can span 2 hours, while the total phase can only last up to 7.5 minutes for any one location. So 7.5 minutes is and I seem to remember finding some that lasted 10 or 12. Maybe that's wrong, but according to Wikipedia, they say 7.5 minutes for the totality of the event, and that, again, that does vary.
It's
a do-it-yourself LASIK exam.
Yeah, I'm just trying to find the duration. Here we go. Totality currently can never last more than 7 minutes 32 seconds. This value changes over the millennia and is currently decreasing. By the 8th millennium, the longest theoretically possible total eclipse will be less than 7 minutes 2 seconds.
Oh, for crying out loud.
Right, as if they can see the future. But I'm just trying to figure out, and it's so hard to find important information in this. 2 pieces of important information in the same article, because all I'm trying to figure out is what is the record for the shortest totality of the event. But at any rate, it does vary, so that's just the point, and they're no longer than 7.5 minutes at our current state of time. So anyways, I'll go back over to the Join Me session and go back into full screen, and you are again presenting.
Okay, so going back, that these are the peak moments, what John was just talking about as far that lasts the 7 minutes. And when you talk about everything occurring in the same plane, is it correct to presume that you've got the sun, moon, and Earth basically being cut by one sheet of plexiglass that extends from the sun to the Earth? Is that how you mean, as on the same plane?
That's right, and that's absolutely right, and really the moon will more or less fall on that same sheet of plexiglass or that same plane, plus or minus 5 degrees, which on average you could just basically say that it's on that same plane. It just varies slightly.
Well, here's where that falls apart real fast. Because, okay, just going back, these are peak events, so over the 40 years that this is type A1, say, and this would be type A2, and B1, B2, etc. And then I also picked a couple that there were the North Pole area that was unique, and 3 at the South Pole that were unique.
And by unique, you mean signatures that don't repeat every 18 years?
No, that do repeat. Okay. That do repeat. Okay. All these, the types are the ones that repeat.
Okay. All right.
And then the total ones are just, again, filling in the database of all events in that 40-year time span.
Okay.
In
approximately half are referenced by type, meaning the signature, and the rest were just the event itself.
Okay, so you went into pretty good detail just to get a way to categorize them easily and reference that later.
Right, like I was just talking about with here, that this would be a this would be a type, this would be a type,
right,
etc. Okay. And then it's good to know what is occurring throughout the year. So I took 2016 and just to see what Sun and Moon are doing according to these graphics. That this is taken at 0 hour at day 1. It's not exactly day 1. I started December 21st, I believe. But just to see the path of the sun will go vertically. This is about this winter solstice, December 21st, and it will progressively go northward and hit the equator area at the March.
Yeah.
The spring equinox, and cross over and continue forth until the summer solstice, stop, and then come back. Meanwhile, Mr. Moon is traveling a sinusoidal path of going north and south along a plane like this. And it's shown, again, the size of the moon jumps, and that's only a graphic inconsistency. It does not mean anything physically as far as all of a sudden you've got the moon twice the size of it usually, and you'll see as I progress. This is what you kind of question. Well, see, you got that, and no, that's not all of a sudden the moon doubling in size physically. It's just a graphic inconsistency.
Okay, so we'll just think of that as a placeholder for the moon as opposed to an actual representation of the size of the moon.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
So the size. So
you can see how it goes
here. It's just the position that's important. Okay.
Right. And I had no control over the graphic, so it just is what it is. And as you can see, the sun, and I'll go a little bit faster, and you can see the sun, again, this is 0 hour, and it travels north to south as the year progresses. This is broken down into identifying each day of the year numerically in order. So again, day 1 is January 1st. Day for the leap year, day 366 is December 31st.
Okay, and just for anybody out there that's not familiar, essentially we're focused in on the prime meridian, which cuts up and down through the center of the map here. And essentially the sun over the course of a year is going to make its seasonal pass from Cancer in the north to Capricorn in the south and back over the course of a year. And so what we're witnessing here is, I guess, what is this, high noon at the prime meridian over the course of a year?
It's hour zero, which is the UT time is 0.
Yep, there you go.
All right, so I'm at day 180, 195, 200, etc. To get an idea, I just needed to see what the graphic display of what's being depicted, and this is what is shown. And that was a eclipse event that just happened to be in there. Okay. So now, let's kind of see graphically what's being depicted. Go back to those solstice events, and these are the hourly moon-sun shot.
Okay.
So now we've got dynamic motion for both sun and moon. And I apologize for bouncing here. It's itchy trigger finger.
You're fine.
So as both progress, obviously the sun east to west and the moon same. And they end up overlapping. But again, it's just showing the location of these at this is the winter solstice.
Okay.
This is the spring equinox. Again, just to kind of get the lay of the land of what's going on.
Well, and the reason that, and a lot of people probably don't understand this, but the reason that we have the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn is simply, and the equator for that matter, and all latitude and longitude lines, is because of observations of the sun. And really, we have sort of manufactured time, or the concept of time, out of what the sun is doing. So, technically we should be able to set our watches by the sun. So if the sun's directly overhead and not casting any shadows east to west, then it's high noon. Regardless of what your watch says, that's high noon. And so I think it's important for people to understand that the sun travels apparently from Capricorn to Cancer and back, and that's where we get the tropics. That's where we get the whole idea of the tropics. So that is what that is.
Right. Again, this is just another display of the sun, and this is the moonlight and the sun. I'm sorry, the moonlight and the sunlight shown on the same graphic. This might get a little confusing, but again, just see what's going on throughout the year. Again, the moon is not traveling that way. It's just the stop image of where it is as it rotates in a east to west motion. So it isn't actually traveling. It's just the rotation from the heliocentric model is that it makes its orbit, say, starting here one day, and the next day it only makes it to here, and the next day only to here. So it's falling back in the orbit as it comes around.
Regressing. Yep.
Correct. So it's not dynamically moving from left to right. It's
I think that the way this is explained in the globe Earth heliocentric model is again, it has to do with the moon not being on the same orbital plane as the Earth, and then our tilt. So we're tilted on our axis, and the moon is slightly tilted on its alleged orbit, and so that's where we get a lot of this apparent traveling from. And when it's not actually traveling, it's just orbiting, allegedly, it's not making a full apparent orbit every 24 hours, and that's where they get the calculations for the speed of the moon. Anyways, and it'll make a full regression back to where it started every month. And in that cycle, we see the cycle, the phases of the moon.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. It's better depicted or understood from the geocentric model because you can see the stop action profile as the moon goes across in hourly segments. So this is the other piece of data that's provided by the website, and it shows those scratches, those signature areas of the event on the globe model. So for this, I mean, I won't. Spoiler alert should be
I'm just wondering
already,
who was down there, and because that is Antarctica that we're looking at, but who was down there in Antarctica to confirm this, I wonder?
George Clooney is. It's always him. This is. Again, I just look at this and go, well, case closed. Okay, run with it. Done, people. But it's, I guess, not that simple. Oops, I'm going to get rid of that. And what happened? It will actually go to the actual one.
But I think it's important that, because I think you correlated that if you look at the one on the right, which is obviously the globe Earth model looking at basically the South Pole, that scratch or that signature of a solar eclipse correlates with one of those signatures, and you can see that it's the exact same sort of signature that we looked at before in the far south. And so that's just another way to look at it.
Right.
You can look at it in a globe Earth heliocentric model, or you can look at it in a flat Earth model, which is what date and time does. So it is a lot easier to sort of understand what's going on if you just consider the Earth as stationary and the sun and the moon traveling over and across it. So.
Yeah. Need to get the eclipse by type. I'm looking for A1.
And if you don't mind, my frickin' wisdom tooth is just killing me, and I'm just wondering if I got a bit of steak in there. So I'm just going to go try to get a piece of dental floss on this bad boy real quick, because it is just, whew. I'll be right back.
Ouch.
All right.
Okay. How you doing? Oop. You all right?
Yeah, I'm back now.
Oh.
Sorry about
Ow.
that. No, my wisdom teeth are coming in basically the wrong way. They're basically, instead of coming up and straight, they're pushing forward and up, and so there's nowhere for them to go. My jaw is not big enough, and so I had one pulled. That was the bottom left one, bottom right. The top left one is basically broken half. The top right one is got a hole in it, and the bottom left one is coming in at such left one is coming in at such an angle that I can't get a piece of dental floss in between it and the next tooth. So yeah, my wisdom, I've always had no problems with dental issues until my wisdom teeth, and they're still coming in, and I'm 34. So yeah, I need to get them. Yeah, I need to get them all pulled. I've had the one pulled. I've still got 3 more, but when I had the first one pulled, it was just so excruciatingly painful because I went to a free dental clinic and they didn't put me under. Normally they'll give you nitrous oxide and put you under. They just gave me they didn't do that for me. They just gave me the topical, Novocaine, and I felt every bit of it, and I had nightmares about it for months. Still do sometimes. Yeah, it was just awful. It was just the most excruciating freaking pain you can possibly imagine.
No, I don't like that.
Anyways, but I think it's doing a little better now. This top left one's got to go, but it basically broke in half, and so I'm very careful when I try to eat. But I had some steak tonight that was excellent, and of course, that's all up in there, I think, and so it really irritates it. But I think.
Wash it down with some popcorn and potato chips. It should be fine.
Yeah, you ain't kidding. So I think I'll be good. I took a Tylenol, so we shall.
The people in my life right now are having teeth issues. Old high school friend. We've kind of reunited on a daily type basis almost because he's gone through orthopedic issues right and left and also heart issues right and left, and he's kind of on hard times, so we're trying to get his teeth situated, and he just had a $2,800 orthodontist repair, and so yeah, it's the
worst.
Interesting.
But it comes and goes. But the show must go on, so we'll continue. And so far we're doing really, really good. We're only an hour and 15 minutes, so if we can try to keep it, to another hour or so, that'd be great.
Yeah.
And there's no hard stops or anything, but around another hour, and I think that should be able to cover most of the solar stuff at least.
Right, and again, we'll go walk up to the front door of the lunar eclipse and get ready because it's essentially the same thing. It's just applied where the sun and the moon are just in the opposite extremes in the sky.
So now that we all, and I don't want to sort of mess up your train of thought or interrupt you, but now that we all now that we all sort of have a basic understanding of what we're looking at, we're just looking at actual data, actual facts according to the various sources that everybody swears by. And we're just observing the data. We're observing reality, and we're going to try and see, how does this affect the heliocentric model?
Well, we're not at the actual data, the number side of it yet. It's just laying out the presentation of what's being depicted.
Yeah.
So now we've kind of gotten our mind with the signature, the scratches, and I could probably drag that up, but as I fumble around, I might lose it. So this event. This is a stop action shot at the peak moment, and you've got, again, one of those low signature scratches, and it may not be clear at this point, but this is the tip of South America. South America, equator's up here, and this is the Antarctic area. So here's the southern tip of Africa and Australia down here. So you have an idea of what's going on.
Well, and of course, Australia is always on the bottom, so. I'm kidding.
Well, no. It's because right now, remember, it's Sun, Earth.
Sun, Moon, Earth.
Sun, Moon, Earth. So somehow we have the sun shining this way, and somehow we have to find a moon between there that casts its shadow here. So aside from being 90 degrees out of whack, that's a bad start point for the heliocentric model, but I'd say I digress, but that's kind of the exclamation point, but nonetheless, so anyway.
Yeah, and that's...
So, yeah, sunlight. This is sunlight. The sun's over here, shining from left to right, and this is supposed to be the moon casting its shadow, that fine-tooth needle on the stylus. The stylus is the needle.
Sure.
The stylus on the record. Globe is the record, and here's that event. So as we plow through the event depicted this way, as we come across, now we've got the overriding sun and moon. And coming up, wait for it. Oop. There it is. Say it's around there. It's like somewhere in between these. So now, what's being told to us, or shoved down the throat, it's one of those two. So, is this depiction is going to also include the sun, moon somewhere, casting this shadow.
Right.
So, not to get silly, but something isn't right.
Yeah.
So let's just find out what the numbers are saying, okay? Everyone wants to run the numbers because the numbers will prove what's really going on, and somehow just wasn't able to do the graphical depiction very well. And even though this is right in its entirety and this is right in its entirety, A does not equal B because it's impossible for that to occur. So what's going on?
Yeah, and the first time that you explained it to me, I didn't really understand what you meant by 90 degrees off of where it should be. And I sort of failed to see the major issue here the first time you explained it. And so if you maybe just want to go through again why this is such an issue, and then we can get into the numbers, unless you want to just look at the numbers first. But perhaps you could just give your explanation or opinion as to why that is a problem for the globe Earth model.
Well, I'm going to try.
And the way that I understand it is there's no angle in this whole scenario, the heliocentric scenario, where the moon could possibly cast that sort of shadow on the bottom of the Earth. Now, this is during the southern winter, so agreed, the southern portion of the Earth should be tilted in towards the sun, but even in that case, remember, the moon is essentially on this same plane, and the sun's shadow is only going to go in one direction, so there's an issue there, and maybe I sort of butchered that, but that's sort of how I understood it, and maybe you can elaborate on that a little bit.
Sorry, I was walking and chewing gum and broke something, so sorry I wasn't following what you were saying, but...
I'm sorry.
It's just... Concentration's an issue.
Well, I'll let you roll on. And just sort of wanting to understand, or somebody that's still sort of scratching their head and trying to understand why this sort of pattern on the South Pole or in the Arctic Circle is an issue.
Well, I just happen to call this event A1, and in a lot of senses, you could just stop here and say, okay, this kind of shows everything. But when you do these types of things, you have to collect everything and present it in its entirety, lay it all out on the table, and see if one makes it conclusive, if they're consistent, in some areas and not others, what's really going on. Because you can't just take one and run with it and say, case closed.
Right. Yep.
Which I just did.
Well, it is. I mean, it is what it is. But at the end of the day, we sort of have to show exactly what we're talking about. And like I told you, I'll try to come up with either an animation, maybe even something three-dimensional, if I can possibly get it to work the way that I used to get it to work. But if nothing else, maybe some two-dimensional animations, or even just some diagrams that better show what we're explaining here. But yeah, so that's obviously going to be the sun.
So this is going to be the sun that's shining, again, way out of proportion, regardless. The sun is to the left of the earth, because here's the sun shine, and the shadow side. And what their graphic is saying is the moon.
Yeah, it's an oblate spheroid.
Call Crow 777. We've got something. Anyway, so again, we had the sun, moon, earth, and so that profile, somehow we have to get from this to cast a shadow here.
Right.
And maybe from a side profile that, I'm good. This is where you just run to the numbers, okay, and see how it's depicted, because
I think
display.
It's important too, and I'll try to come up with some graphics to display it. But in order for the moon to cast that sort of shadow on the Earth, you got to understand the sun is supposedly so far away that all of those rays are coming in essentially parallel lines.
Well, the moon is limited to only being able to go down to there. At the again, this was January, so it's just above the winter solstice. But again, it's confined to just a certain portion.
Yeah, and that sort of sine wave pattern that it makes.
Distance,
yep.
Correct. Oh, where did he go? Oh, where did Mr. Moon go? Oh. I don't know where Mr.
Yeah, that'll work.
Okay. So again, from the globe model, here's the equator. It's showing the moon path along here. Here, so the path of the moon is only up around this area. So the alignment is, you have to be bending quite a number of things for the moon to be up here over that path, the sun over there casting that signature here.
Right. And that's, even with the Earth supposedly being tilted at 23.5 degrees in towards the sun, because, again, this is southern summer, so it's tilted in towards the sun. But even in that case, the shadow couldn't drop any further than, somewhere slightly south of the southern tropic of Capricorn. For it to wind up way down there it's simply impossible in the heliocentric model, and I think that we should probably...
Well, before we get into conclusive
Sure.
statements, and not to kind of cut you off, I gotta revert to the investigative
Sure.
mode, So again, the whole idea is to kind of chop through this, but to get an idea of what's being depicted for a solar event. And again, just from what is going on, and then once we figure out what's going on, then we go to the solar and lunar data and see where it's indicating the sun and the moon are. So at this point of what's going on, I selected 4 reference points from basically the same latitude of 70 west. And
so all of these points
again,
are along a similar meridian line.
Correct.
Yep.
Correct. And it's approximately plus minus 1 degree from 70. And this is that word Canada and Boston.
Yep.
Because BS strong. And Colombia. And the last one is Punta Arenas, Chile. And that's around 53 or 58 south. And this one's about the 40-something north. So the reason these were depicted for the model is to collect solar and lunar data from each of these points. So you've got one sun, one moon, and where do those line up at these eclipsed events? Because we're going to keep it simple and presume one sun, one moon. And again, all these numerically should be pointing to the same direction. Now, as they, in the globe model, do all the angles point into one concentric direction, or do they on the flat model? Again, that's where you've got the 360, 180 going into 360 of... Now we've got the sun directly to the left over here, and all these along the 70 west lat line are, say, well, not the right word, lined up at the minimum distance from the sun.
So essentially all 4...
Now it's getting further away. Got it?
Yep. And all 4 of those points are going to experience high noon at about the same time. That's why they...
Well, one would think on this model. And that's kind of another exclamation point, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. So on this model, you would presume that half in the sun, half in the dark, and again, we got to throw in the little tilt.
Yep.
But again, you've got half of a sphere, and regardless of the angle of the axis is half in light, half not.
That's right. Yep.
And so what you just said is all the sun and sunset and peak noons would be relatively the same, and unfortunately they're not, and the numbers will indicate that. Again, when you look at this from a numerical standpoint, there's times a day, and then you've got different time zones, and they reference either UT time or local time. And so just organizing the data into a uniform time and reference point was not it wasn't an arduous task. It was just time-consuming task.
Yep.
And I'll show you how the tables were created to try and keep everything consistent. And if it wasn't consistent, then it becomes somewhat glaringly, and little corrections can be made as needed.
Okay.
So again, that was the principle or the concept of how I was looking at this is from either model that all these 4 reference points should be pointing at a sun and a moon during an eclipse event. And so where do those values show that the sun and the moon should be positioned? On this model and then on the flat model.
Right, because I guess if I'm following you in the globe Earth model, regardless of, if we assume that all the distances are correct and the Earth is a globe, and we assume that, then all of those points should be able to see or experience a similar eclipse because of the distances involved. I mean, doesn't that seem like it should be what we experience?
Well,
if you've got the moon at quarter million miles out and the sun at 93 million miles, if they're lined up for any point on that meridian line, then it should be lined up for all points on that meridian line. But, that's just what I would expect to see, but at any rate.
So go to this graphic.
So go to this graphic, and we're kind of showing those 4 locations, and during these eclipse events, that as each of these point to the sun and the moon, they should align. Here we go. Right, so if we can somehow follow this. Again, from the heliocentric model, that all of these points should, for the peak ecliptic event moment, should all point at the same direction. And again, on this model, all these should point in one direction and have a convergence somewhere. And this is where people have to either agree or disagree that you cannot have the same convergence of points on this model as you do on the flat. And I'm not going to make that statement because that's a conclusion, and that's something people have to figure out for themselves, whether or not that's a valid statement or not. Meaning, can the sun and moon locations on this model be the same on a flat model? And that's a yes or no answer.
Well, I don't think that the distances can be. I think they're mutually exclusive.
No, the distances, no, that's why you only took a percentage of the increase-decrease. You can't do the distances
right.
too.
But I definitely follow what you're saying, and
here's the flat model, can all these point to the same direction as this model point to the same direction?
Well, no, because again, I think that graphic that you have of the globe sums it up very nicely. That
people have to prove that to themselves, because I'm not going to make a declarative statement and then all of a sudden it's like, no, it's not because of this. No, you have to answer that yourself, and it's yes or no. And once that's determined, then we'll go. I'm going to keep going, but that's something I'm not going to tell you, because you have to figure it out yourself. It will become evident, but it's not a sometimes this, sometimes that, and at real weird times it's not exclusively or usually one, but sometimes the other. It's either yes or no. From a mathematical standpoint, can you have this line up at one point and this line up at one point? So that's your homework, yes or no. And
right, and I just think if we look at that globe Earth model or that globe Earth depiction where you've got those arrows pointing out from the different directions, yeah, that's a good example to me of something that I've tried to sort of point out is that directions or like north and south are sort of relative to where your position is on the globe. And if you're looking straight up from the southern area, say that's the red arrow, if you're looking straight up overhead, you're looking in a totally different direction in space than someone in the northern area looking straight overhead and say that's the blue arrow. And so I totally see what you mean, that if our world is wrapped around a ball, then I just don't, you have to go with that assumption first
Right.
to accept the distances involved. If you look at this in a flat Earth model, I personally don't think that you can have your cake and eat it too, if that makes sense. But that's just my personal assessment.
Oh, geez. Yeah, it's okay. Again, the answer or the question being thrown out is, does this equal this? And can all these equal each other? And that's a yes or no. And this is where the numbers will determine what that is. But conceptually, can we have all this occurring?
Right.
And again, this is just kind of laying out where the arrows on this point to the reds, the summer, and greens the equinox, and blue is the winter sun. So again, approximation, but just to give a general layout, so kind of see what's going on.
Makes sense.
Now, just to get familiarized with how the data is going to be presented, I very color oriented to a fault, and some of the stuff starts looking like Walt Disney threw up on paper, because it's, again, what I do is I color things different ways so I can just look at columns and know which area to target. And again, this will become more evident as we kind of go along, but this might be a little bit confusing, but yeah.
Well, it seems like you've essentially plotted those same observational points on a azimuthal equidistant map, which is a flat Earth map. And you and I have discussed, there are some issues with that, just like there are issues with every sort of map. But it's good to use for reference because it's based on reality. It's based on observations. It's based on solar reference points, stellar reference points, to where you can map the world out on a globe. You can map the world out on a azimuthal equidistant projection. You can map it out on a Mercator projection. And as long as you sort of adhere to these latitude and longitude rules, it works. And there's issues with all of them. That includes the Mercator projection, that includes the globe, that includes the azimuthal equidistant. But in this case, we're going to use it because it's just a different way to look at the same map, either a globe or a flat Earth. So anyway.
Right. So I'm kind of cutting to the chase, but we probably shouldn't hold off.
Yeah, we can go in whatever order you think is best.
Well, I'm going to kind of walk through instead of just going to the end. Okay. Oh, that's crud. Must be having a brain reaction to have looked at this for 5 weeks and taken a break.
No, you're fine. I know exactly how it gets when you got big projects that you spend a long time on. Sometimes it can be hard to retrieve everything. So no worries. We've got plenty of time. So.
Hey, just so you know, we can talk over this. I sent a package. The first wave of the challenge went out today to all the big universities, like 130 of them.
Oh, did you really?
And so all the Harvards and Yales and MITs and everyone else, they got the disc and the invite and the setup for the challenge.
And so, do you want to just sort of introduce what that is? I don't think we've even mentioned it on here.
No, this is an aside. I'm sorry, my brain is just really.
Well, and I guess this applies to anybody, though. It's a $5,000 challenge to explain how this particular eclipse event is possible on a globe with the given, heliocentric.
Well, it's like to me, it's a carnival trick that, I know that you can't win, so I'm just throwing it out there that if you guys want to try, go ahead, but kind of know what the answer is. So go ahead.
Usually I don't like being in a contest that I have some sort of unfair advantage. Usually I like a fair playing field, but in this case the opposition is so ignorant and so just vulgar that it's almost like well, I know that this is correct and I know that these people are wrong, so it's almost like it's something where you can't lose, and it's sort of, I don't know, to me it's out of character to enjoy that, but when you've finally run into this truth and you get so much fierce opposition, you got to really relish the little, I don't know, the little bits that you can relish, I suppose. Anyways.
Yeah. I'm getting a blinding headache because I can't find the file. I got to take a break. I'm really hurting.
Well, let's do this then, because we got.
Oh my God, I'm serious.
We got a bunch of good stuff in. We're almost at 2 hours, anyways. So
seriously, because I'm hurting and I can't find a simple file.
Let's regroup and we can pick it back up tomorrow.
Yeah, because this is what I'm saying, John. I've got too many personal. I don't like using pain, but my body's. I've got some stuff going on now that I can't think straight at times. We don't need to tape record.
No, that's fine. We can wrap it up for today.
My concentration is severely crippled right now.
No worries, man.
Because I can't even find simple stuff.
Well, that's fine. No worries. We got a bunch of good material already for today. We'll pick it up tomorrow. Wait a minute. What's tomorrow? Wednesday or Tuesday?
Wednesday.
Okay,
Wednesday.
I've got
I find the freaking. Sorry.
No, you're fine. I've got a show tomorrow at, what time do we do it on Wednesdays? 8 Eastern. So I'll have, all day tomorrow anyway, so.
Oh, this is what I'm looking for. Okay, we can pick up.
Okay, you want to keep going?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because this is what I was looking for. So, briefly, so you go back to each of those locations, Canada, Boston, Colombia, and Chile, and for all of those solar events, 43 in all, by type and by event, go through. And copy and paste the data.
Right.
As it's presented. In those tables.
Okay.
We've got the moonrise. That the tables are presented this way. For this is say pick any month, and so if the event was February 16th and the eclipse was on the 8th, I would take this entire month, copy it, paste it, and do the same for the sunrise, sunset data, paste it, and go to the next event. So again, this is 1 times 43 times of the same thing. And right. And this is for Boston. So you do the same thing at Columbia and Chile and Canada. And as you go through that, for some of these eclipse events, there's no information provided in Canada for this ecliptic event. So again, I just threw down the NASA profile and what was occurring that day. And here's the day of observation. And again, nothing can be seen up in Canada. But as we get lower, I don't know if you can even see any of this event from Colombia, but certainly in Chile, there is information on that. So again, consistent information consistently for each location for every event. And I know it's a lot in its totality, but that's kind of what you have to do. You can't select and cherry pick things. And so this is another event. You got the NASA image. You've got the location of, or the peak of the event.
Yep. Okay. All right.
Okay. And then we do the same thing for Boston. Same tables for Boston. Same tables for Columbia. And the same for Chile. And then we throw them on another spreadsheet and call Canada the dark blue, Boston the medium blue, Chile the red, and Columbia the green. Again, that's just the way I do things. Is south is red and north is blue and the equator is green. The reason I did this is somewhat irrelevant, but again,
well, it's easier. I definitely understand the value of color coding. So yeah, understood. So
as you're looking at a wall of numbers, I can at least know that this relates to Boston, this relates to Columbia. Again, not rocket, engineering or NASA engineering things, but these are where little hiccups come in where the sunrise starts occurring midday, so you've got an AM/PM issue going on, so then you start getting a gap in there, and then you've got the daylight savings occurring for some of these areas and not the other. And again, when you go, what makes this a good way to do it is, as you look at numbers, you want to just look all the way across instead of looking for it up here, looking for it down here on the other one, and over here and over here. Again, just to line everything up. So from this depiction, you start chopping up that table to get from this to this, so they're all lined up. So now I can look at sunrise, sunset for each of these on one line.
Okay, so you're basically juxtaposing the different areas, lining them up on the event. Okay.
Correct. And this is the event. Again, this is there's lots of brain explosions in between, but again, these are the what the moon's doing also at these. And again, for solar eclipse there's a new moon.
Yeah, that's one thing that I have found in my research is that any sort of at least total annular solar eclipses is always conditional. It's going to be a new moon or like no moon.
And that's really the reason that this is going to be beneficial is for once this discussion of what shape it is, meaning the accuracy of the model being flat or the sphere, is to jump to the next level of trying to get the precision of the map out there. And that's where I think these tables can come in somewhat handy, because you've got fairly defined distances between these cities, and it's reverse engineering is they all point to one location, and working backwards from that location, determine where it lays on the flat model, and is that distance laterally between Boston and Canada what it's shown on the internet. And for that, I didn't use these numbers, but I know it's easy to get because I didn't want to start throwing out there and getting exactness, but
no, we'll get it as we can get it as accurate as we can possibly get it, I would say. And if you'll excuse me 1 second, I got to run to the bathroom. All right,
right behind you. But up in Ann Arbor, not in South Carolina. All right, I'm back.
Okay, I'm here.
Cool.
Yeah, we'll wrap this up because I'm fighting really. I'm swimming upstream like you wouldn't believe.
And I hope you get to feeling better and get some rest. And I'll plan on getting back up with you earlier tomorrow than I did today, just because we did a show that I wasn't planning on, and so it sort of set me back. And tomorrow I do have a hard stop at about say 7:30, so. Maybe we'll get up in the get together in the afternoon, and we can at least put a couple hours in.
I'll be ready
whenever, and just to let you know, we're basically around the last stretch going home, because kind of just got the setup of what's going on. Now we go to how all this lays out, and when we get to the plot, and say we'll just cheat and indicate what it looks like on this model. So as the sun goes along, that this is where the peak event is, and as the moon overlaps again here, now does all the data for, well, this was a bad one because it's on the other side of the events over here, and all those test sites are over here, so let's go to another one. Actually, let's go to a meridian plot. This might be better. This is kind of cheating. This is not cheating. Sorry, this is a spoiler.
Okay.
Here's a spoiler. And again, just raw information, throwing it out there without even fine-tuning it. But ballpark that you've got the meridian location, and this is for the day event, not the ecliptic event, but the day's event. And again, the reason I did this was, well, let's just see what's going on with the day and see if which model makes more sense, or which not makes sense, which graphically depicts what's going on. And for this, we've got the moon data, and this is the peak noon for the moon, and peak noon for the sun.
Okay.
And just throwing out those raw that's how those line up.
Okay, and again, the red is
right,
going to represent the Chile, and then the different locations are represented by the different colors going up that meridional north to south line.
But it is erroneous to conclude that all these should meet in one specific point, because on this view, it's working with angles that are really occurring like this. That you've got a sunrise, sunset, and your peak noon coming off at an angle, and you've got all these different angles coming in that on this cutaway view can't line up.
Okay.
I know it's talking and overriding certain things, but do not expect all these to line up into one concentric point, because it's just in the general area versus lay all this out on a globe model where, again, I'm talking about where 90 becomes 180, 180 becomes 360, is you're wrapping this now around from top to bottom, not flat across. Again, that's where I'm saying that 0 or 90 goes to 180.
Right, yeah. Yeah, I follow you, and all of this I think goes back to the original, Eratosthenes himself, who allegedly calculated the size of the Earth and the distance of the Sun just by measuring the angles and the distances of the shadows cast by the Sun at high noon at different points on the same meridian, and by assuming that the Earth is a sphere, you get a totally different number than assuming that the Earth is a plane in terms of the distance to the Sun. And so, I think, I would tend to agree with you that there's issues with expecting those lines to converge at the same point using the flat Earth model or the azimuthal equidistant map, just simply because of the issues that, I have with the maps themselves. So I definitely follow you.
Right. So going back to where I said you have to make the decision of whether or not you can have all these lines converge for both models. You've got them converging like this on the flat model, and as you wrap this around the heliocentric model, can all those still merge at some point?
Right, yep.
So that's kind
and it seems to me that in order for them to merge at some point, at least one of the people, maybe on the very north, would have to be looking directly through the frickin' ground to see that point. Anyway.
Well, the little sneaky thing here is that these are the numerical layouts, but you get into the description of the direction, and this is going to be hard for me to describe, but...
Well, and one thing that I never, I understand why they say they do it this way, but we only have, even in the globe model, you've got 90 degrees north and 90 degrees south for a total of 180 degrees, but you've got 180 degrees east and 180 degrees west for a total of 360 degrees. So what, is it a globe and a frickin' triangle?
Well,
I know it's because it's a cylindrical map is what the Mercator projection is, and that's what really the globe and everything is based on, is this cylindrical projection. So they're basically taking the Earth and splaying it and folding it out, sort of erroneously is a good word, I guess. But that's where we get those inconsistencies in the degrees of latitude versus longitude. That's my understanding of it in terms of the official narrative. So.
And as you lay these out, that they have, these are just the straight, if it says 39.4 degrees, I try to get it as close to that as possible. And as far as I use them straight like this, you kind of see how they all point. One of these had to be rotated because of the way it's described as the orientation of it. And again, this is where it's hard to describe, but you can kind of see where these had to be rotated, flipped around in order to make any sense. Because if I just do them like this on the globe model, they absolutely don't point anywhere near convergence.
Right.
So for these, they, just by the way they're presented, for any sense, they have to be flipped around. Again, it all gets back to what we're calling north. North is up on the. This is like a brain explosion number 6,122. Is the one model, north is toward the North Pole, which is the center in the sphere, versus the center in the circle, and again, it's which is 0 and 90 and 180 and 360. It's a lot of going back and forth and what directions things are.
And I think that's why it's so hard sometimes for people to really fully come to terms with this truth, is because there's so much programming involved with what we understand to be reality. It's almost impossible without really just demolishing all of your assumptions, and a lot of times really doing deep research into these assumptions, to where we can come back, come through the other side of this and say, well, wait a minute, all of these assumptions that we had were wrong, and so now let's really start looking for answers. But
what happened was, and give credit where credit's due, that Mark was talking about from the gaming standpoint, that they have to design basically a profile of a surface. And when I started thinking that with all the NASA data on 18-year cycles, that they have to use a model too. So it's like, well, which model does NASA use? Do they use one that's spinning through a freely flying system that's going to have 0% chance of repeating itself, or one that's on a finite situation on a table layout, like a model on a gaming standpoint, and use that as the model for your earthquake predictions, to go back umpteen zillion years and forward umpteen bajillion years.
Right, yeah.
So that was kind of like, okay, so what model did NASA use? And that's what it was like, well, A equals B, B equals C, and so A equals C, and they use a flat model to determine earthquake.
Eclipses.
Eclipses. Earthquake.
Eclipses. No, I know what you meant. I got you. And, I'll definitely agree that...
Well, I'm not looking to agree. I'm sorry, that came out a little harsh. It's what is. This isn't an opinion poll, it's understanding poll of, do you understand what's being used? And what NASA uses is a flat model for their predictions. And this is how they derive where that location is for the eclipse event.
Yep.
Again, working backwards, and I know that those are declarative statements, but the whole question was, does NASA use a flat Earth model for earthquake or for ecliptic events? And the answer is most definitely yes.
Yeah, that's no surprise, and I really like the way you put it, because I always thought, and again, this sort of brings us back full circle to where we opened the conversation, was that, growing up, I always just assumed that solar eclipses would be far less likely than lunar eclipses, just because of the nature of the system and what sort of incalculable odds are involved for this tiny little moon to perfectly transit the apparent sun would just seem mind-bogglingly unlikely. But if you look at a 100-year period, solar and lunar eclipses are just as equally likely, and in fact, they do repeat on very predictable cycles, which to me is just very, unlikely in the heliocentric model where everything is zipping around in circles and you've got all these alleged gravitational forces from the sun and the planets and the galactic center. So yeah, the fact that this stuff repeats is very damning evidence to the globe model, I would say.
Right. And just going back when I said a few minutes ago about things flopping here, is remember on north of the equator, north for these guys that are north of the equator, north is pointed in this direction. So that's where the sun's kicking up in the sky for, is this sunrise? Or no, peak noon. And in the southern hemisphere, that this is the south. This is pointing south on this side.
Okay, so I see what you did.
So that's why everything had to get, why half of these had to get flipped. Again, presenting them on, again, that's a sensical standpoint, not someone coming out, oh, you just can't